Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Roofman, starring Channing Tatum, Kirsten Dunst, Lakeith Stanfield, Ben Mendelsohn, Juno Temple, and Peter Dinklage, directed by Derek Cianfrance. Now, I don't know much about the story, but I remember seeing a, a story about it on the TV recently. On 60 Minutes, I think is what it was. I can't remember which one it was, but it was probably on the news somewhere, but will it be a convincing story? Let's get into it and find out. This is a true story set in the late 1990s to early 2000s of a criminal known as the Roofman named Jeffrey Manchester, played by Channing Tatum as he robs a McDonald's in North Carolina and puts Dwayne, Jade, and Jocelyn in a freezer as he steals their money. And Dwayne didn't bring a jacket to the day for the day. Meanwhile, the cops come to the McDonald's drive-thru and Jeffrey gets away with robbery, which was kind of funny to me. And we get introduced to his daughter Becky asking for a bicycle as it's her birthday, and he gets her his old toy they can connect with, as Steve, played by Lakeith Stanfield, happens to be there. And they talk while filling up a pool, and Jeffrey brings Becky to her mother's work at McDonald's, named Talina, who doesn't seem to like Jeffrey and comes off like a bitch to him from start to finish. And do I like some of the characters? Yes and no, as Jeffrey doesn't learn jack shit about life as a criminal. He has a criminal record. And Jeffrey goes inside the McDonald's to look at the safe before he robs it. And the main character comes off rather absolutely unlikable. And he doesn't learn anything from his mistakes. And it takes him until the end of the movie to do the right thing. Jeffrey gets a real bicycle for Becky and actually gets for her birthday and gets her a bicycle until the cops go after Jeffrey because he runs away. And they do catch him and sends him to jail for a very long time. And Talina doesn't want Becky to see him ever again, as he learns it on his first day in prison, which is fucked up in so many ways. And he hurts people left to right. And in my opinion, he isn't the greatest actor, but the performance by Channing Tatum, he does do a good job at making me dislike him, while Talina comes off like a bitch to begin with. And I sort of relate with Jeffrey as he wants to get out of prison, but at the same time I don't like him. While he gets a way to get out of prison by looking under a truck and sends deliveries as Jeffrey does some work, and director Derek Cianfrance does a fine job at telling what the story is thus far. Jeffrey hides under the truck after some deliveries and stays on the truck, while the guy driving the truck stops to take a leak, which feels a little weird, as Jeffrey escapes from there while hiding on the bushes and changes clothes, and he hitchhikes to only see Becky riding her bicycle, and he finds a place to hide as he calls Steve to get a passport, and he says, wait for a motherfucking month, as he tells him to hide, and he's near a Toys R Us, and he hides in there for the month, or for a long time, I'll say, while he's encountered by the manager Mitch, played by Peter Dinklage. And Jeffrey goes in the restroom to hide from the cops as he goes to the vents and sleeps there for now, as the story is pretty interesting to be told in the thief's point of view. Jeffrey gets out of the vents and tries to get some candy but can't get to it, and he rips the picture of Talina out of the way as he finds a way to stop recording the entire story so he can go around the Toys R Us and get himself a Spider-Man backpack as well as some peanut M&Ms and a perfect spot to hide, and figures out a way to hide behind the bicycle section and takes some toys and a mattress for kids as he tries to on some clothes. He showers in the restroom. And the last one sounds disturbing but to be fair, he has to keep himself clean while putting up some cameras in Mitch's office, and he spies on him, telling his employee Lee Wainscott, played by Kirsten Dunst, who doesn't come off as a good actress in general, as she comes off for a job and very little hours, and Jeffrey gives it to her and not Mitch, as he comes off like a fucking tool. And the cinematography was fine, and this is so far a credible film, but not incredible in my opinion, and that's my opinion on director Derek Cianfrance. He makes credible films, but not incredible. Steve disguises his name as Oliver and calls Steve and gets his girlfriend Michelle, who is played by Juno Temple, and tells him to call him in December. And is this taking place in the summer? As that kind of bothered me. And Jeffrey calls Becky, and she picks up and eventually gets to Lena, and she believes it's Jeffrey and says to not call the house as everyone moved on without him. As nighttime comes and Jeffrey messes up the Elmo shelf, and as Elmo says, "That tickles," which I'm not going to get any better at this. And next day comes, and Otis is accused by Mitch for stealing peanut M&Ms, while the production design and set decoration is good, as Lee tells Mitch to come to a church to donate some toys for them, but he doesn't give a shit. And Jeffrey comes to the church and donates a lot of toys for the church and sits in it and meets Pastor Ron, played by Ben Mendelsohn, as well as his wife Eileen, and Lee as a different identity named John. And I'm sticking to what IMDb calls him, which happens to be Jeffrey, as he was told he's the one who donated all the toys to the church. And I like the chemistry between Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst, as they come off rather charming, even though they're not great actors in my opinion. Jeffrey likes to be John more than Jeffrey, but once again, I ain't using it. And sells some video games to go to a dentist, and learns he has 34 cavities and joins the single ladies' dinner for a church purpose. And he's enjoying himself and says his job is classified while he sits next to Lee. And after dinner, Lee wants to ask Jeffrey out on a date, and he accepts. And they make a date to meet at a park on Saturday morning. And we get there, and I like them as a couple, as both actors are not very good actors in my opinion, but they did deliver fine performances. After the park date, Jeffrey has a different identity, and Lee have sexual intercourse, and she brings up their daughter, 11-year-old Dee, and teenage Lindsay. And when the day ends, Jeffrey goes back to Toys R Us to sleep in Spider-Man bed sheets. And we move on to Jeffrey meeting Lee's daughter's Dee, which is short for Delia, whom he gives her a plushie of Link from Legend of Zelda, and Lindsay, whom he tries to give her music, but she doesn't accept, and gives Lee some flowers, and they spend so much more time with them together. And do I care for the daughter characters? They're innocent, so yes, I care for them, as we move on to Pastor Ron singing while in church service, and Jeffrey looks mesmerized by Lee and Dee, and happens to notice that as Otis tries to tell Mitch off, but he's too chicken around the little bastard, while Dee gets some bangs. And one problem I have is the acting by the actors it comes off a little obvious that the performances are sometimes a little flat, but not in every scene, but some of them. Jeffrey showers while Mitch is still in the building, and he stops so Mitch happens to see Jeffrey as he's nude, and he runs back in his comfort area, which was pretty funny. Which was a pretty funny scene, as this is a dark comedy / drama, which works for the movie. As Mitch calls the cops, and Mitch hears the cameras are not recording, and Jeffrey goes out and with Lee and her girls to Thanksgiving church dinner. And at the end of the scene, Lindsay brings up the naked man that's on the TV, and she says she hopes that sex was worth it, which was inappropriate timing during Thanksgiving dinner. And December 1st comes, and Jeffrey calls Steve about the passport, and Lee and Dee and Lindsay wake up and try to apologize to one another. And Lindsay says she needs a ride to Doug's place, and the dialogue in that scene was cringeworthy, as does the writing. Jeffrey tries buying a car for Lindsay and test drives one, and Jeffrey drives too fast, too furious, and teaches Lindsay to drive and buys a car for her in cash, and the salesman tells Jeffrey don't drive like that ever again, and Lindsay got them back safe and sound, and Lee talking with Jeffrey while still disguised as John, as he goes to Steve's place to get a passport, as he wears a wig to disguise himself as the different person. He owes lots of money to the fucking to get the fucking passport and just to get a gun and to get the money. And Lakeith Stanfield comes off like a little better here than he was in Play Dirty, where he felt wasted. Jeffrey gets to a pawn shop to rob it and to get a gun and ends up right next to a door in a different place. Breaks into the pawn shop to grab a gun and multiple alarms go off because he tries to find a way to escape. And he does and runs the fuck out of there and goes back to the Toys R Us and gets in front of the roof and he listens to the cameras as well as the meeting about how money is coming into the store. And Mitch schedules everybody a lot of shifts as Jeffrey did late leave from working Christmas Eve as Jeffrey picks up Lindsay with a bunch of Christmas decorations and decorate their place and go to church that night with Lee, Dee, and Lindsay as they get there. Jeffrey seems depressed about because he has to leave them soon, with Lee noticing it, and it seems like he's up to something as Jeffrey gets prepared to pull off the big heist. And he does it and knocks out the security guard and makes him bleed, and he takes the money from Mitch, and Lee witnesses it as she runs away to Otis, saying to Jeffrey, the robber, he's like a bully. And Otis demands Jeffrey to call the hospital, and this is making me think somebody should know at some point, as this is taking too long to get to the point. Jeffrey does escape while the cops show up to the crime scene and question the witnesses like Lee and Steve gets the money from Jeffrey and makes him leave on Christmas Day, and he burns the evidence to the dentist office as he was at the Christmas Day. And Christmas Day comes, and Jeffrey doesn't want to leave North Carolina quite yet, but Lee calls him and wants him to come to their place for Christmas, as I know the cops are waiting for him to pick up the phone, and comes to Christmas dinner, and this is getting pretty damn depressing, but to be fair, this motherfucker has it coming. Jeffrey gets to Lee's apartment as he decides, fuck it, he'll get arrested, as he does, and doesn't fight them like this time like he did the beginning of the movie, and goes back to jail and decides to never get out of ever again as he made a new memory with Lee and her girls while Lee felt devastated about because how much he hurt her. And he gets a call from Becky, who's doing good at school, and he confesses he did the wrong thing in a therapy session, and we end with Lee visiting him in jail as he learns Dee has better bangs kept her bangs, while Jeffrey apologizing about how much he hurt her, and he says he'll visit her sometime, and we get footage of the real paper being interviewed on the TV, and we learned he'll be out of prison in the year 2036, as the climax was predictable at the same time, and the movie was good, but how good? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 6.9 out of 10. It was kind of funny as this feels like a dark comedy / drama, which works for this movie. And the character Channing Tatum plays comes off unlikable because he hurts people left to right. And in my opinion, he's not the greatest actor, but the performance did a good job at making me not like him. At the same time, as I sort of relate with him, while Peter Dinklage comes off like a jackass, and while director Derek Cianfrance does a fine job with telling the story of how a man who robbed McDonald's stays in a Toys R Us and falls in love with a woman and her kids. And this is an interesting story to be told in a thief's point of view. The production design and set decoration is good, and while the cinematography was fine, and director Derek Cianfrance makes credible movies, not incredible, but credible. And the chemistry between Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst comes off rather charming, as they're both not very good actors in my opinion, but they do okay in this movie in my opinion. The actors deliver fine performances, as this is not a great movie, but it's a good movie. And this is a recommendation for the movie, but nitpick I have is the acting comes off a little obvious, that the performances are sometimes a little flat. But not in every scene, but in some scenes, as the dialogue is cringeworthy, as is the writing, but at the end of the day, this isn't a great movie, but it's good. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for doing Derek Cianfrance, as this guy mostly makes credible films. And until he ever makes another one, don't end up like the Roofman, ladies and dude mans.